Last year, the U.S. Federal Reserve began the journey of understanding the implications of structural racism in America's economy. So the Minneapolis Fed started a series of talks entitled Racism and the Economy. The most recent panel focused on entrepreneurship, and one of the contributors, Kelly Burton, PhD, is the executive director of the Black Innovation Alliance, and she joins us now. Thank you so much for joining us, Kelly.
Hi, Renita. Thanks so much for having me.
Fantastic. Now, you have more than a decade of experience as a political scientist, serial entrepreneur, and in helping founders of color scale their businesses. So briefly tell us the main focus of the Black Innovation Alliance.
Sure. The Black Innovation Alliance is a national coalition of innovator support organizations. So these are organizations that support small and medium-sized business owners, tech founders, and creative technologists. And so our mission at BIA is to create the sort of ecosystem that is necessary for Black innovators to succeed and to thrive.
Absolutely. And so on the panel that you participated in, you were one of the disruptors. You brought a very interesting conversation to the forefront. And so first, let's identify that problem of the barriers of entry, really, that founders of color have when they're trying to get into entrepreneurship. You talked about supplier diversity. And tell me first, for those who don't know, what the concept is about and why you believe this is a top area where we can target and help bring more equity to.
Absolutely. So supplier diversity is a model that came out of the Nixon administration. And it was dedicated or designed to help to mitigate or limit discrimination specifically towards Blacks in the procurement system. Since then, it's been opened up to other groups, including women, LGBTQ, the disabled, veterans, even small businesses. It's the primary means by which corporations and governments sync with diverse suppliers or small businesses.
And so you broke down the numbers, which I found quite fascinating, of the few small businesses led by people of color and others who are in supplier diversity directories during the panel. Can you paint that picture for us here and how we come to the number?
Absolutely. So people of color comprise 39% of the population in this country. But unfortunately, their businesses receive less than 2% of government contracts and less than 5% of corporate contracts. Supplier diversity is supposed to increase those numbers, but year over year, those numbers remain relatively flat. And there are a couple of reasons for that. The two main reasons are corporations really struggle to support supplier diversity within their organizations. One study proved that upwards of 53% of corporations have one or fewer supplier diversity staff. And so if you can't even direct sufficient resources to bring on the talent necessary to move the program forward, how do you expect it to be successful? In addition to that, corporations tend to rely on certifying bodies to help them to identify small businesses, firms, startups led by people of color to work with. But unfortunately, these entities do a poor job of actually reaching out to the broader community. On average, they tend to certify less than 1% of the universe of diverse suppliers. So for example, NMSDC, which is the national certifying body that certifies small businesses led by people of color, tends to certify about 11,000 to 13,000 small businesses every year. That's 0.002% of the total universe of minority-owned small businesses.
Well, that is very shocking, especially considering the fact that a lot of small businesses level up by getting the business of corporations, by getting those contracts. And so you had some very specific things that the Federal Reserve could do. So how would you imagine, or how would you suggest the Federal Reserve reimagine supplier diversity so that small businesses owned by people of color can really have more access to corporate opportunities?
That's a great question, Renita. And so in my proposal, I suggested that we reimagine supplier diversity not by thinking about how we fix a broken system. Supplier diversity is over 50 years old, and it has underwent very little reform since its beginning. I think the better question is, how do we solve the actual problem, which is limited access for people of color to these enterprise level opportunities, the sorts that really enable them to scale? And it's quite possible that if we start with that question, how do we fix the problem, we might end up with a very different solution, one that is more fitting of our modern world.
It sounds like it, Kelly. And so I wonder, as we come to a close, tell me something. What type of ripple effect could possibly result from this reimagining when it comes to access to opportunity?
That's a great question. We have a lot of, I think you mentioned when you opened up this segment, the conversation around systemic inequality and closing the wealth gap. But what we know is when it comes to wealth creation, entrepreneurship is the number one creator of wealth around the globe. It actually eclipsed inheritance about 5 or 6 years ago. And so if we are going to make any movement on closing the wealth gap and moving that needle, we all need to double down on entrepreneurship, especially in communities of color, where we're seeing the greatest growth. So 8 out of 10 of the women who have started businesses in recent years were women of color. Black women in particular are the fastest growing demographic of entrepreneurs in the country. So the desire is there, the motivation, the determination, the hustle is there. It needs to be met with the opportunity. And that's what we're not seeing. We're not seeing the access. And we're not seeing the opportunity. And so if we were able to really get corporations and governments to level up on their activities in this area, it could help us make real traction in closing, moving that needle and closing the wealth gap.
Absolutely. Sounds like more accountability that could be going across the entrepreneurship ecosystem, especially with corporations that help foster entrepreneurship. Kelly Burton of the Black Innovation Alliance, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Renita.